All right, today's going to be pretty brief. We're just going to go back, take a look over flow control. Anybody have any questions on flow control after they got through it on Monday? All right, remember when you're first starting out, it's kind of nice to go out to diagrams.net, build out a nice little flow chart. You can drag these in, you can kind of set directions of things that they're going to go. And it's nice to know where it's going and kind of get a general flow. The ones that you see in here, you can use the similar boxes, say yes, no, whatever. I'm not saying that you have to do this for every single script that you do, but the bigger it gets, it's nice to at least compartmentalize some of the more complicated stuff. All right. We talked about if, elif, and else's. We talked about while loops, for loops. Does anybody remember what the third spot in the range command does? Yes, it's the stepping command. So whether you want to increase by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever number you put in there, you could also decrease by that number in there as well. We did imports, and we talked about imports. Remember that imports always go where? At the top. All right. Hopefully you guys took a chance to get through the practice questions and the rock, paper, scissors game. That's a good one to know how LS and all that other stuff works in between there. So today's going to be fairly short. This is one of the few times I actually walk you through one of the homework assignments, at least a good chunk of it. I will get you guys your graded homework assignments here real quick for that first one that came out. But today we're going to take a look at assignment 2 and what you would do to get that. Second here, let me get the right version of idle up going. All right, so remember, we always want to put our comments up here at the top. Thank you. Okay. So we have our comments at the top, or obviously assignment 2. And if we go out to assignment 2, go ahead, throw in these right here at the top. So we know what we need to get done. Make sure you comment those out so you don't have any issues. Okay. So first point, making sure we got these comments at the top. First should be a pretty easy point. Then we'll want to use at least 2 different comparison operators. Remember, the comparison operators come from that first table. So these are your comparison operators. I want to see either a double equals, not equal to, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So we need at least one of those. And we need at least one Boolean operator. So we need to check 2 things within the same line. We can do an and or an or a not. We need at least one if statement that must contain 2 elifs and 1 else. So this usually trips people up and they lose points. They'll have like 1 if, 2 elifs, and then no else. And then on another one, they'll have an if and an else. And they're like, hey, I have it. No, you need that exact chain. You need at least 1 if, 2 elifs, and 1 else. You can have more than 2 elif statements, that's fine. But as long as it has 2 elif statements and an else in there, I want to see the whole chain. We need a while loop that has they break and continue. A lot of students will forget the continue because sometimes it's implicit and they just like, oh, we don't have to put it in there. Yeah, you do, because the homework assignment says put it in there. So make sure you have a break and a continue. You need at least 1 for loop using the range method. Doesn't matter how you use it. And then you want to use the import keyword to bring in the random module and use a random integer somewhere in your script. I would prefer that you do something with this random integer. Don't just randomly put a number on the screen. It's better if you find a way to randomly use this number. So a lot of times what you'll see, even with this homework assignment, when we start playing with the if statements, is our number guessing game that we started to play with the other day. That's one way for you to start comparing things in there. So say we wanted to get started here. Again, you can do whatever you want with your homework assignment. Doesn't matter to me. We just know we need at least 2 comparison operators. So let's start off with, hello, can you give me your age? Okay, we need to get age as an input. Then we need to try to compare something with that age. Remember that when that age comes in, we need to convert it to an integer. It would be wise to not try to put this right here, because if we put the int function right around the input to convert that around, yes, it would try to work, but later when we want to sanitize, we would like to know later on. So it's best habit to just get it as a string, and then we'll convert it during our check. So we'll say something like, if my age, remember this part does need to have the int around it so we can convert it to a number, equals, let's say 20, print, it looks like you are 20 years old. Okay, we're going to have an elif statement, int my age does not equal 10, print you must not be 10 years old. Elif int my age greater than or equal to the 20, print you must be older than 20. And we'll do another elif check, and my age, if you are greater than 30 and int my age is less than 50, print you are not more than 60 years old. Else, print you didn't match one of the checks. Okay, so this is a very basic program, but there's some issues with it. First thing we're going to do is check to see whether you're 20, right? So if they typed in 20, we're going to immediately print this comment right here. If we check to see if they're 10, if it's not equal to 10, then we're going to get this comment, right? Now, what's the problem with having this here when we have these 2 checks below it? It's always going to hit this one, right? Unless the number's 10. It's going to be the only time that this doesn't get caught. In which case, none of these other ones would trigger, right? And then it would hit else. So it essentially makes these invalid at this point. We'll never hit these checks. Does everybody see why that happens? So we should probably take this int 10 because we're specifically going for that one. And we can put that at the end down here. And we could probably change this to say you must be 10 years old, because otherwise it's going to catch it, right? And print this, you must not be 10. So now if we look at this chain, we're going to see if they're 20. Then they're going to print 20 years old. Now, what's the problem with this next line? What's that? we'll get to it if it's over 20, right? But we're also checking if it's equal to 20. So if somebody types in 20, this one's going to trigger. If we were intending for this to come in order for them to be older than 20, we need to either use greater than or greater than and equal to 21. Okay. If they happen to say they are 35, then what happens? This is going to print, right? So we would never get to this part. So there again, we want to have this check. Down below the first one that would trigger. All right, so now we're going to check to see if you're greater than 30 and you have to be less than 50. So this would be fine, right? We would say you're not more than 60 years old. If they are not greater than 30 and they're less than 50, then we would go down to the next check, in which case we check to see if they're greater than 21 or equal to 21. At what age would this trigger? What's that? Right. So say you're 22, 23, 24, all the way up to 29, right? Because it would change at 30. Would it? Right, because we're checking for greater than 30, right? So anything from 21 to 30 is going to get caught here. What else would we get caught there? What's that? Yes. But that would also get caught. Yes. So 21 through 30 would get caught here, right? What other ages would get caught there? Anything 50 and higher, right? Because we did a check here that they had to be both greater than 30 and less than 50. So this is going to catch anything from 21 to 30. It's also going to check for anything higher than 50, or including 50. If for some reason that they are 10 years old or anywhere less than 21, then they're going to hit this one. And unless they specifically type in 10, then we're going to find out that they must not be 10 years old. This one would check to see that they are specifically 10. So this is a good chain. In other words, every single one of these is going to be possible. We're not creating one of these that would never get called. Everybody kind of see that? So you kind of want to run through these checks in your head as you're building out your LIFs to make sure that every single one of these gets called. If not, move it around because it can probably get called if you just adjust it a little bit. Now, the other thing is we would want to check this and say you are not more than 50 years old, right? That would be a more valid answer to that one. And these aren't very precise, so we would probably go back and fix our print statements to be a little more informational as to what check they got caught on. All right, so there's a couple things that we did with this little chain here. One, we need at least 2 Boolean comparison operators. We did a equal to, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, and not equal to. So we got way more than 2. It does want 2 different comparison operators, meaning that you shouldn't do 2 checks of equal to and call it good. I want to see you use these different ones. And you can see why, because once you have to double check in your head that this number matches what you were looking for overall. All right, we need to use one least Boolean operator. That is this check here, where it has to pass this. This has to be true, and this has to be true in order for this print statement to work. If I type in or, that will really change things, right? Because now either one of these just have to be true. If the age is greater than 30, it will immediately print this. If it's less than 50, it's going to print this. The problem is that if we had 10 in here, now none of this would ever get called, right? So we must use and up here in order to make sure each one of these are valid. Otherwise, we have to do this check lower in the chain. All right, we also need a part that has at least one if statement, two else, and an else. We meet that because we have three elifs and the else, and they're all valid. So when I grade this, I'm going to check and make sure that whatever you have in here, that each one of these are possibly called. Don't put an else in here that would never be possible because you ran all the checks to make sure they were possible. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay. We also need to have a while loop in here. It would probably be wise that we do some kind of check maybe on the input. So while true, my age equals input. For now, the only way we have of checking this input is checking to see that they typed anything at all, right? So we could do something like if my age, or in this case, say the len of my age is greater than 0, then we will what? We'll break out of it, right? Else, we would print that is not a valid age. Please try again. And what that's going to do is make sure that they don't just press the enter key. We're checking to make sure whatever they typed in is at least greater than 0. We still can't determine at this point whether they typed in the word Jason or whether they typed in 33. We don't have the tools yet in order to do that kind of check. But we can at least check to make sure we didn't get a blank input. So the benefit of doing it this way is we now have a while loop, we have a break command inside of it, and we have a continue sign inside of it. Note that this continue down here, I really don't need because what's going to happen? After this line of code executes, what's the next line that executes? Which one? The my age equals input? Yep. So because we're inside of a while loop, and this is indented the way we have it, right after we print this, it's going to go back to the next indentation, in which case there's no more code. So this loop starts back over again. And it's going to prompt them right back over again to put in their age. Then it's going to do the check to make sure that they typed in at least something in there. Which means we don't necessarily need to continue, but we need it for the purposes of our homework assignment. So we will type in continue, which also means start the loop back over. Continue on with the rest of the code, basically. Again, a lot of people will leave this out, but you got to make sure you have it in for the purposes of this homework assignment. In real life, you wouldn't necessarily need to continue here. Now, if I had other code down here, such as print then what continue will do is go ahead and print this next line. It would actually go ahead and continue down with the rest of the code, which is exactly what would happen if once this code does, it's done here. We may want another break or we want to do something fancy, we can do that. But again, for simplicity's sake and understanding where we're at, this works. We also need to have a for loop and using the range command. So we could print something at the very beginning here if we wanted to. We could say for I in range. And we're going to do something like 0 to 11. Say print asterisk. And let's do it this way. Print the asterisk as a character. All right. What is that little piece of code at the top going to do? it's going to print 1 asterisk the first time. On the next line, it's going to print 2 asterisks, then 3 asterisks, then 4 asterisks, all the way till we get to number what? 10, right? Because we go up to 11, but does not include 11. Perfect. And then the last requirement we need is the import. So at the very top, we import random, and then we somehow need to get a random number generated on this screen. So instead of just printing a random number to get that value, instead of 11, let's do random number equals random dot rand int. And we want a number between 1 and 10. Remember that when you use rand int, it's going to start at whatever the first number is and include whatever the last number is. In other words, give me a random number between 1 and 10, including 1 and 10. That's now denoted as random number. We're going to stick this here in our random range. And so now what will happen is we won't have a specified number of asterisks that are going to get printed. It's going to be a random number every time. So that we can use a random number inside a range command. We could use it down here in a check if we wanted to. So for example, we could check down here and say elif int my age equals random number print your age is the same as the random number. Something like that. And so now whatever this random number is, it's going to be something between 1 and 10. If they say that it's the same as the random number, then they're going to go through here. Now, what's the problem with this? In what case would we never get this else statement? Which isn't a bad thing, but what's that? 10, right? If their age is 10 and the random number happens to be 10, then they're going to get this print. They will never see this one, but it doesn't matter because we're telling them, hey, your age happens to be the same as the random number. What we could do is put a comma on here. And then we could do a string concatenation and tell them what the my age was, right? Or the random number. In which case we got to convert that to a string. So we would say random number like this plus, and then we would go ahead and do some kind of spacing in here so that it looks good. Okay. So very simple program. I would encourage you to do something like this. You can do whatever you want, but don't make it specifically what you see on the screen here. Try to at least do something different so that you can understand it. So if we run this, and we call it assign to, we got an invalid syntax. So for I, let's just space that off there. All right. I never closed this after I changed it. There it goes. So in this case, does anybody know what the random number happened to be? Three? Anybody have any other guesses? You're actually not wrong, Grant. It's 3. Does everybody see how he got 3? What's the actual random number this first time? Right here. Is the number 3, Grant? So what's the actual number? 4, right? So how did we get that? It was meant to be a trick here. So in this case, it didn't print anything because if we do string replication and I is going to start at 0, then that means that it's not going to print anything, right? We're not going to do any asterisk if we multiply by 8 or by 0. So nothing prints. The second time I is equal to 1, therefore we do replication of 1, replication of 2, replication of 3. In order for us to get that range, it would have to be 0 to 4. So our random number must be 4. All right. So we say, hello, can you give me your age? We're going to say 33. And we get age is not defined. Why is that? Because I made a mistake on this line. See if I did that anywhere else. Nope. Okay. What's the random number this time? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you called it 9 because we started 0, right? So give me your age. We're going to say 33. And we hit the trigger of you are not more than 50 years old. What's any problems there? Does that look like what we should have triggered on? Looks about right, right? So let's run it again. And this time, let's say we are 20. We're going to hit our trigger that says we're 20 years old, which means this first check worked right away. Run it again. We're going to say 21. And we get the trigger that says you must be 20 years old. That works. We run this again. We say 12. We get the trigger that says you must not be 10 years old. If we run this one again, we say we are 10. It says you must be 10 years old because our random number didn't happen to match the number 10. And the last check here would be to see if we can get this random number to be the same, in which case we say we are 3. Now, why would we get you must not be 10 years old? Does anybody remember? The only time we would get this random number is if it's 10, right? Okay, so say we randomly take this out and we say it's equal to 10, just to test our code. We got that, we say 10, and we get the response that we're checking for. Now, notice how I did every single one of those checks. You will want to do that with your homework and run and make sure that every single one of those works the way you anticipated to. If it doesn't give you the right response, then you probably have these in an order that doesn't work. And I can't emphasize that enough because if your code doesn't work, you lose points. So always go back and check your code to see if it performs the way you would expect it to. In this case, we could have kept running it until the random number happened to hit 10. But in this case, we can just designate what that random number is. And we would want to make sure that we take it back out before we submit the homework assignment. Anybody got any questions on how these assignments work? All right, again, please don't use this same homework assignment. Do something a little bit different, modify it, change the output, something, so that you can see how this all works together. The more creative you are with the homework assignments, the less you will struggle on your midterm. Try to be a little creative with the homework assignments. Otherwise, when you get to the midterm, because I don't tell you what you have to do, you're going to struggle. You got to learn to be a little creative and come up with something random. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.